A day in the life of a gold panner. In the mid-1800s, during the Great Gold Rush era, a young man named Thomas Smith found himself among the many hopefuls searching for fortune in the rugged terrain of Northern California. Thomas was 17, with a lean frame and a determined but weary expression. His day began before dawn as the first light of morning filtered through the dense forest that bordered the river where he worked. Thomas woke in a small canvas tent and its sides slightly damp from the previous night's dew. The ground beneath him was uneven, and the thin blanket provided little comfort. He stretched and yawned, then slowly rolled out of his bedroll, brushing off the dirt that clung to his trousers. He shuffled over to a small metal stove and started a fire to heat some water for his breakfast. His meals were simple, hardtack biscuits and bacon, sometimes with a bit of coffee if he had enough grounds. This morning was no different. After breakfast, Thomas gathered his equipment. His panning setup consisted of a wooden sluice box, a pan with a shallow concave base, and a small shovel. The sluice box was a long rectangular trough made from wooden planks, and it had a few metal riffles nailed to its bottom to catch any gold that might be carried by the water. The pan, made of tin, was somewhat battered and discolored from frequent use. Thomas made his way to the riverbank, where he joined a group of other miners who were already hard at work. The river was a modest stream, its water clear but chilly. The banks were littered with rocks and pebbles, and the occasional fallen tree provided some shade. Thomas selected a spot along the river where the current was gentle but steady. He dropped his tools on the ground and began the monotonous routine of panning for gold. First, Thomas used the shovel to scoop up a bucketful of gravel and silt from the riverbed. The gravel was gritty and cold, and as he filled the bucket, he could feel dampness seep through his gloves. Once the bucket was full, he carried it to his panning area and began pouring the contents into the pan. He submerged the pan in the water and began the process of washing away the lighter materials. He swirled the pan gently, allowing the water to carry away the sand and silt, while keeping an eye out for any flecks of gold. The motion was repetitive and required patience. Thomas's arms grew tired as he continued to swirl the pan, the water splashing and creating small waves. Periodically, he would stop to inspect the pan, shaking it gently to help settle the heavier materials at the bottom. Each time, he found mostly black sand and small pebbles, with only an occasional speck of gold, which he carefully collected. The gold flakes were tiny, almost insignificant when compared to the vast quantity of material he sifted through. As the sun rose higher in the sky, the temperature grew warmer. Thomas wiped the sweat from his brow and took a brief break. He sat on a nearby rock, his back aching from hours of bending over the pan. He took a sip from his canteen, the water cool but not refreshing, and looked out over the river. The landscape was dotted with other miners, all engaged in similar tasks, their faces reflecting the same mixture of hope and fatigue. Around noon, Thomas resumed his work. He continued the routine of scooping, panning, and inspecting. The process was slow, with occasional brief moments of excitement when he found a particularly large flake of gold, only to be quickly followed by hours of disappointment. The sun reached its zenith, and Thomas was careful to keep hydrated, though the water did little to ease his weariness. By late afternoon, Thomas's progress was modest. His collection of gold was meager, and he knew he had only a small chance of striking it rich. He packed up his tools carefully, placing the pan and sluice box back into his cart. The gravel on his hands had become encrusted with dirt, and he washed them off in the river before heading back to his camp. Once back at his tent, Thomas prepared a simple dinner of beans and more hardtack. The evening air grew cooler, and he sat by the fire he had lit for warmth. As he ate, he reviewed the day's work. The gold he had found was minimal, but it was enough to keep him going for another day. The life of a gold panner was demanding and often disappointing, but the hope of finding a substantial amount kept him moving forward. After dinner, Thomas washed his pan and sluice box in the river, ensuring they were clean for the next day. He made a final check of his supplies and settled into his bedroll, tired but unable to sleep easily. The excitement of the gold rush had faded into a daily grind, but Thomas was resolute. He closed his eyes, letting the sounds of the river lull him to sleep, ready